Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today earned a BA in English and secondary education and taught 7th grade English and writing for 15 years. As much as she loved teaching junior high students, despite the horrified looks on people's faces when she told them what she did for a living, in 2015, it was time for a change. She dreamed of writing a novel and wanted to pursue that goal. She obtained an MFA in English and creative writing from Southern New Hampshire University, began writing A Week of Warm Weather as her thesis, and completed the novel. For the past 3 years, she spent her time teaching at the college level and publishing and promoting her novel. She's also a self-proclaimed Billy Joel superfan with a live concert count of 44 shows. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Lee Bukowski.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Our opening question on Authors Over 50 is, so what took you so long to write your first book?
It's a question that I know all of us who waited this long think about, and I do think the honest answer is that I think as a much younger woman, I would not have had the life experience that is needed, I believe, to write a novel like mine. I'm an avid reader, always have been, and I always was in such awe of the way authors captured really the complexity of life and people, all the joys, all the sorrows. And I really think that I needed life experience, not just the master's degree. Those things are wonderful, but I really think that now I know where from I speak, if that makes sense. I just don't think, especially with some of the sensitive issues that my book explores, I don't really think I would have done them justice. I don't think I could have given them the depth and the weight that they deserve if I had tried to do this as my younger self.
I agree. I think writing in life's sweetest third affords us a lot of wisdom and a lot of hindsight.
I totally agree.
Lee, we have to hear about your obsession with Billy Joel and how it began.
It began when I was in about 8th grade. When the Stranger album came out, I was hooked instantly and started going to concerts. You know, at that age, I started going with my parents taking me to the concerts. And it just continued. Billy Joel and if you listen to his interviews, which I have many times, he's a songwriter. He really considers himself a strong songwriter, even more than a vocalist. And so in that way, he's a storyteller. And I think it's really his lyrics that speak to me. He really incorporates a lot of his life experience into his lyrics. And so I got hooked. And I mean, I have story after story. When I was in college, if he would be in the area 3 nights in a row, I'd go all 3 nights. I spent every bit of my spending money in college on Billy Joel tickets. Wow. I drove my parents crazy, and it has continued. And I've made my kids Billy Joel fans. And so recently I did go to my 44th concert. I've gotten his autograph. I've jumped up on stage. Of course, that was many, many years ago. But he just, I just love him. I'll keep going he's much older than me. So as long as he can keep going, I think I can keep going.
Wow. I bet he recognizes you now after 44 concerts.
I really think he should. He did stop a concert one time because I had a sign that said it was my 35th concert. So he actually stopped the concert and spoke to me, which was a huge thrill. And I mention him quite frequently in my book. And the very beginning of my book, my very favorite Billy Joel song, which is called Summer Highland Falls. It's an obscure song. There's a line from that song that I actually put in the very beginning before my book. The line is, "For we are always what our situations hand us. It's either sadness or euphoria." And I think it's not only true in life, but it really, really resonates. It resonated with me in writing my book. And so I actually have at my last concert, I gave his people a copy of the book and wrote a little note in it. And so they said they'd give it to him. So maybe he's read it. I don't know.
That's exciting. I was a big Beatles fan, and I got to see them when they performed in Memphis, Tennessee when I was 12. So I understand that. Well, Lee, once you wrote your book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I actually have my sister's best friend is in the publicity business. And so she mentored me in the beginning. I started out the traditional route, trying to find an agent, querying agents at, the big publishing houses. And it was a year of, it's so grueling. And I did get some interest. In fact, my sister's friend, when I would read to her the things that I was getting back, she'd say, just keep going. Let's see. I always laugh and say I got some lovely rejections. So I had some interest, but in the end, it was always, this isn't right for me at the time. So it was compliment, but no kind of thing. And so at that point, my sister's friend introduced me to indie publishing, which I really have to admit, I didn't know very much about at all. And when she talked to me more about indie publishing, I really liked the idea. It's very author-centered. Most publishers in the indie business worked at the big five and the big publishing houses, and they thought, there's a better way to do this, a way that's maybe more author-centered. So I did some research on it. I wrote to a few accepted my manuscript, one of which was She Writes and Spark Press, and that's who I ended up going with. And really, that's just the beginning of the whole process, finding representation, even though it took so long. At that point, then it's deciding a cover and editing and the layout, and that takes several months. It actually takes up to a year. And then you have to decide about publicity and how you're going to, marketing and all those things. So it's a very, very long process. I was lucky to have a mentor who could kind of guide me along the way. But so I did go with an indie publisher.
Well, they're very well respected in the industry, so you chose well.
I agree. In fact, my sister's friend said, if you can get She Writes and Spark Press, so I was so thrilled. I was really honored when they did tell me then that they wanted to publish my manuscript.
What was your inspiration for this book?
I think, again, it kind of goes back to what took me so long to write it. As I mentioned, I always have been very enthralled with the complex nature of families and relationships and the writers who capture them so well. As I was thinking about my story, I started to do some self-reflection, and I was at the time trying to figure out why I had made some of the choices that I had made and what kind of put me on some of the paths that I chose. And I decided I tied those things into my book. I was always a rule follower. It kind of goes along with then, becoming a teacher, but I was always kind of the people pleaser, the good girl, the rule follower. And as my life progressed, I realized that didn't always serve me well. And I really needed to do some self as I said, some self-reflection. And so it kind of drove in. It's interesting because as I was writing my book, I feel like my main character, as I wrote her, Tessa is her name, I really learned a lot about myself. And I feel like through Tessa, I gave a voice to some of my own experiences and things that I had been feeling. And so really my inspiration was to kind of look at a person who, it seems to have a great life, and on the outside, I think that's kind of, I don't think it's a trope necessarily, but it's fairly common. But what's really going on, behind closed doors? And those are the things that kind of inspired me and really shaped the characters in my book.
Well, how did you determine the plot?
I think the plot really was driven by the character. So I took the idea of the girl who seems like she's got this great life. But there are fissures, and those fissures begin to become very apparent. And so she gets married, and then an issue comes up in her marriage. I'm trying not to give spoilers. And so then it puts her on this path of really self-discovery. And so I took that initial feeling of my own looking back on my own life and people that I had observed, friends, family members. As I said, as a young woman, you don't have the life experience. As the decades went on, myself, my friends, my family members, we all, started to face some things that, were inspiring, I think, in a way, in terms of storytelling and connecting with other people maybe going through something similar.
Well, I know you wrote this book during your master's degree program. Has it changed any? Did it change after you wrote your thesis?
You mean the story?
Mm-hmm. The manuscript itself?
So I was very fortunate. As you mentioned, the thesis program, the thesis part of the program was the first 30,000 words of a fiction novel. And some of my classmates were just horrified by this. And in fact, some dropped out. It was too much. But for me, I felt like it was really the momentum that I needed after that first, because the typical fiction book is usually around 90,000 words. So that was about a third of the book. And so it really lit a fire under me to keep going. But in the end, it was over the word count. And so I did have to change. I actually changed. There are two subplots in the book. One of them I changed completely because I decided that the outcome would be better suited if I changed it. Other parts, it's simple editing where they tell you, listen, this is just too long. And so you've got to get rid of some of this. And that's where I tried to cut out the things that weren't really the story. They weren't germane to the story, should I say, or my book is a book I feel that's very character driven. So I did edit out the parts that sounded more like me talking rather than driving the plot of the story. So it ended up at about 102,000 words. So I had to cut it down to ended up with about 94,000. So I definitely did cut out some.
What does the title mean?
The title is, and I'm not going to tell you exactly because it's one of those, it's something I've always enjoyed, is looking at the title and the cover. And then, and if it's not really, sometimes it's very evident. Sometimes there's nothing to the imagination, and that's fine. But I always enjoy when I get to a part in a book and I say, oh, that's what the title means. And I actually had a different title for my book right up until I was looking for a publisher. But while I was writing, while I was writing the first draft of the manuscript. But while I was writing the book, I got to a point that the title, A Week of Warm Weather, is part of a conversation between my protagonist and her husband. And it is pretty late in the book when it comes up, but it's where they're really at a crossroads, and it's part of a conversation that they have. And so I decided when I finished, I thought, you know what, that's what I'm going to call, that's what I'm going to title my book. But as I said, I'm not going to say exactly because it's going to be one of those moments where the reader, and I've had people reach out to me and say, oh, I was wondering about the title because I think it implies some things, but not what you'd think. And so there was that little bit of mystery that you find out when you're reading the book, exactly what the title means.
There's so many of us who start with a working title and change it so many times. I did the same thing. My book has a thread of memoir running through it, but it's not memoir. So my working title was A Chosen Child, which means, an adopted child, which I was or I am. But I changed it, like you said, to be a part of a conversation between the three birth mothers instead, because the book was not about just one person. It was about all of them.
Oh, interesting. I like your title too. Mine has threads of memoir as well, but then there are a couple, as I said, I have two storylines that are completely made up. And it's interesting because the title, the publisher had told me, the title's so important that, if the publisher doesn't like your title, they know, they've been in the business. They know what sells, they know what captures people's attention. And I felt very protective of my title, but everyone told me going into it that, if you find a publisher and they don't like your title, that you might have to change it. Yours has some alliteration in which I like that too, that mine has. As an English teacher, of course, I like that. But I was really happy that the publisher liked my title and so then I kept it.
What about your writing routine? Are you a morning person or a night person?
I'm definitely a morning person. All my time lately has been spent marketing and promoting this book. I intend to start another book this winter, but writing, I'm definitely, I need to get up and start fresh. I start to drag, later in the day, usually by 4 o'clock or so, especially if I've been working all day. But one hard and fast rule that I have is when I'm writing, if I'm stuck, I don't quit. Because if I quit at a point where I'm stuck, I dread starting again the next day. And so even if I hate what I've written that day, and there were days where I thought, oh my gosh, I've been writing all day and this is just garbage. And but I think I've got to plow ahead and at least know where I'm going to pick it up the next morning. So the writing, I definitely start in the morning. The thinking, going to bed at night, and when I'm lying in bed falling asleep, that's where inspiration, oh, that's what I should do with that scene, or that's what's wrong, or you know what, I think I mentioned this, but I shouldn't have because this didn't happen yet. So I don't get out of bed and jot things down in the middle of the night like I've heard some writers do. But so it helps me if I write earlier in the day, and then I can sort of reflect and think about it late in the day and at night, and then kind of start fresh again in the morning.
You mentioned a thread of memoir. Did real people inspire any of your characters?
Yes, some of my characters definitely are based on real people, and some are sort of what's the word? Maybe a conglomeration of a few people. Because especially secondary characters, what I think I've learned, and just from reading books, you don't want too many secondary characters. If there's a friend group of 5, maybe you want to cut that down to 1 or 2, just not bog the reader down. So in that sense, there are some where I took some traits from a few people that I know. Some are based on real people. Some are, again, completely made up. So I would say in that way, as you said, a thread of memoir, which I do think that it's not uncommon for debut authors. I think it's really, really common. You sort of pick apart your own life and then you begin to put the pieces back together, and it's not your life story, but this happened and that happened, and maybe I'll incorporate this way and this another way. And so I think, especially as a debut author, I really found it helpful not only to base some characters on real people, also my setting. I set my book in the area where I live. And that was intentional as well, because I wanted to really be able to describe the landscape and the streets and the houses and the businesses and the people. And I felt that could do that more authentically if I set it in, obviously a setting that I'm very familiar with.
And I think that's why our first books are so personal to us, because we do inject so much of ourselves and our surroundings into them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you describe the editing process you chose from taking it from your thesis to the full novel?
Yes. So another thing, I was really fortunate that in my master's program, I had a group of peer editors, some of whom were my classmates, but also I was part of a writing and editing group online where we would help each other with editing, with edits, with, if you're stuck on something, here's a scene, how should this wrap up, that kind of thing. So that was really, really beneficial. And then when I finished the first draft of the manuscript, I had some beta readers. So I did choose a few who knew me, but I really felt it was important to choose a few who knew nothing about me. Because some of the people and situations are based on my life, I felt I really needed some beta readers who knew nothing about me. And I ended up on a trip where my husband and I met a few couples, and the women were avid readers. And we ended up talking all about books and things. And so they live in different parts of the country, which was nice. So I sent each of them a copy of the manuscript. They were just two. I had two or three others. And so to get their feedback. And these are people who they're not in the publishing business, because I really feel it's so important to have people in the publishing and book business edit and look over those extra eyes on our work. But really it's the readers, so it's really the reader. I wanted the perspective of people who were not looking at it as a business, but who were looking at this manuscript as, is this a book that I would want to read? And readers, those types of readers are the best, because you don't know, you can think what you've written is so clear, makes perfect sense, but that reader will say, wait a minute, I see a little bit of a disconnect here, or this goes on a little bit too long, or, so that kind of thing I think is invaluable, because as hard as we try, we don't see that in our own writing. And so as I said, I had people in my program, which were great professors who helped with editing, but then also I had some beta readers who didn't know me at all.
I think that's so important, because I can look at your work and find the mistakes immediately, but I can't look at my own work that I've been working on for so long. And when I send things out to my advanced readers and they don't understand a portion of the story, I'm saying, wait, what? I mean, it's so clear. So
How did you not get that?
Exactly. So I think it's very wise to let the readers tell us what works for them and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Why don't you set up a scene for us in the book and then read for us so that we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
Okay, so this is a scene. As I said, my protagonist Tessa she's in a marriage where, and again, I'm trying to do this without spoilers. So she's in a marriage where her husband begins some strange behavior, mysterious behavior, and it not only is it a problem for her in the present, but it begins to resurrect a trauma from her childhood that she had not dealt with and didn't even realize that she hadn't dealt with. And so this issue that she's facing in the present is bringing to the forefront all these buried feelings. So I've chosen a passage that it's actually just after she discovers exactly what's going on with her husband. Tessa imagined this was what it must feel like to drown, to try to swim to the surface, to think you see daylight, only to be dragged under again by the force of crashing waves. Her mind felt like a jigsaw puzzle someone had abruptly knocked from a table with the brush of an arm. Here was a red piece. Was it part of a sweater sleeve or a piece of a heart shattered into bits? And a pink piece. Was it a petal of a silky petunia or a lip turned downward in anguish? She curled up in a ball on the sofa. A bathing suit she'd bought Ronnie, a bright orange one-piece, was still in a bag on the floor. Tessa felt a strange nostalgia for the person she was before today. The person who bought cute bathing suits for her baby daughter. The person so upset when she spilled wine on the sofa cushion that she'd gone to 3 stores to find the right spray cleaner. Before today, those were the problems she thought worthy of fretting about. No, this can't happen again. Now she covered her face and wept again. She had no idea what to do. She knew only that she could not talk to anyone about it. It would be easier to make it go away if only the 2 of them knew about it. She had to keep it contained, nice and neat. To let it out would ensure its growth into something so monstrous it could never be reeled back in. She had to fix this. She would get through to Ken. She would make him see this was not the answer to whatever stress he was feeling, that he was only making it worse. He was on the edge of a cliff, but she could pull him back.
That's very descriptive and very telling of scenes that a lot of us have experienced in our life. So thank you for that. What about publicity? I know you've been working on marketing this book for a while now. Can you share with us maybe something that worked or something that didn't work?
Yes, I really felt that I needed publicity. And, you know, everyone has to decide in terms of what you're willing to spend, where you are in terms of exposure when you're starting out. I really had no social media presence. I had no brand. And so I really felt that I needed a publicity team to get me the exposure that I just really didn't have access to. I decided to go with the in-house publicity team for She Writes and Spark Press because I felt like we were this triumvirate. So we had the publisher and the publicity team and me. And 2 of those 3 knew a lot about what they were doing and 1 did not. Obviously, I'm the one who did not. And I really felt that it was important that they worked so seamlessly together. I just really felt that that was the way to go. And that I have to say, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work on my part, but also they worked very hard for me. They worked very hard to get the book into the hands of as many people, both locally and even nationally, as they could. And of course, you know, the final say, they send it out to as many places as they can. In the end, you know, some outlets will decide to give you publicity, others won't. But in the end, they really helped me to reach, I mean, hundreds of thousands of views and just getting me on things. I got on some lists of, you know, books to read for the summer. Some of those were syndicated. And again, I just had no access. I mean, I knew I could sell books to my family, my friends, people in my area, but beyond that, and as I said, it certainly is costly, but for me, I felt like to drop the ball at that point, I felt would really sort of, you know, kind of just really let the air out of everything that I had worked so hard for. So I would recommend publicity. For me, it was I needed it, and I really benefited from it. But again, I think it's a very personal decision based on, you know, where you are when you start and if you have any sort of connections or maybe even some name recognition.
You mentioned starting another book this winter. Do you have the premise for that already thought out?
I do. So it's completely different, has nothing to do with the first novel, but it's going to be right now in my mind, and we'll see if this stays. The book's going to open with a car accident, and there will be a couple who's in the car accident, and the husband will be killed. And a series of events will unfold after that, where possibly there were some things that seemed accidental, but there were more to it. The underlying, again, I really like to write about family and relationships and marriage. And so the main character will be a woman who desperately wants children. And so it's, it just doesn't seem to be in the cards for her. She just desperately wants to mother, to nurture. It's in her nature. And so it's going to kind of be her journey to see whether or not that happens, or whether there's more than one way for her to be a mother.
Interesting. Lee, what do you think was the best money you've ever spent as a writer?
The best money, I would say, again, is publicity. As I said, for me, I had what I think is considered a successful launch in June. And I really don't think I would have had the success without the publicity team. I'm now continuing because the publishing season is about 3 months. So my publishing season was the summer. And so between the publicity that I've already received from my publicity team, now I'm continuing. I'm going to be, I have an Amazon campaign. I'm going to be looking at Facebook ads and really targeting where my readers are. Now that my launch season is over, really trying to just get out there and speak to and have access to a whole new audience. And so I feel at this point that that's the best money that I can spend to keep my book in the conversation.
Well, we all think that the first few months are just so vital and important, but I'm seeing books that are more than a year old, several years old, that are hitting some lists. So I don't think we have to worry about our books dying on the vine after a few months. I think they have legs and they'll continue to be read.
Yes, one of the authors that I've become friends with keeps reminding me, your book is not a quart of milk. It doesn't have an expiration date. And so I think that's very good. It's something very, very good to keep in mind.
Well, always our last interview question is, our writers are so unique. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
I do. I think I would have to say to not look at age as a detriment. I think it's so common. And I was actually joking with a few of my author friends saying, oh no, I lie about my age and now I'm going on the Authors Over 50 podcast. I'm going to be found out. But I think that really, I feel like I've kind of reinvented myself in these last even 10 years. And I think there's this mindset. I think there's the tendency to say, oh, it's too late to do that, or that ship has sailed. And so looking at age as a detriment, my advice would be to embrace it. As I said, it's the life experience, it's the people I'm meeting, the connections that I'm making. I'm meeting people, other authors, and that who I know will be lifelong friends. And I just really, this journey, once I opened my mind to it and decided I can do this. There's no reason. I'm going to be 50 years old is not a reason not to do it. In fact, my daughter probably gave me the most sage advice when I was saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to resign from my other job and get a master's degree but I'm going to be 50 years old by the time I write this book. And she said, Mom, you're going to be 50 years old whether you write that book or not. So you better go ahead and write it. And so I really think that I've tried to change that mindset, to not look at age as a detriment, but to really look at it as a benefit, the experience, the connections, the new friendships, just the new opportunities that I wouldn't have had the courage to take as a younger person. So I would say, embrace I know it's so, everyone says, oh, it's just a number. And I know it's hard. It's hard sometimes to think about getting older, but I would say don't look at age as a detriment.
I certainly agree. And I think we can reinvent ourselves for many more careers in the years to come. I'm interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they are still writing beautiful work. So I think we have chosen a career that we can continue the rest of our lives.
That's so true.
So, Lee, thank you so much for being with us today and for offering your expertise to everyone. And we're so excited now to say you're one of our authors over 50.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.